My name is Vanessa Brooks. I am 36, a forensic accountant, and a mother who learned that silence can keep a family dinner peaceful while quietly teaching the wrong people that they are allowed to hurt you. At my parents' backyard cookout, my 9-year-old reached toward a tray of cupcakes I had paid for. My sister slapped his hand away before his fingers ever touched one. "Those are only for children with real potential," she said, smiling as though cruelty became harmless when it was delivered gently. My child froze. My mother stared at her plate. My father tilted his head toward the gate and said, "He can eat when you get home." Nobody defended him. I did not argue. I folded the foil over the food I had brought, lifted the catering trays, took the cooler sitting beside the grill and walked out with my son. Behind us, someone yelled that I was being dramatic. I kept walking because I finally understood that they were not waiting for me to explain my pain. They were waiting for me to give in again. At exactly 11 p.m., my phone showed 71 missed calls and messages. My sister had called 26 times. My parents had called 17. The rest came from a lawyer, board members, employees, and a bank vice president. I turned the phone face down and let it ring. They thought I had left because of a cupcake. They had no idea what I had taken with me or what their so-called potential had been built on. Before I tell you what my father said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what is the weather like there? I'm curious how far this story will travel. My son's name was Aiden, and by the time we reached my car, he had stopped asking why his aunt had said it. That frightened me more than tears would have. Tears meant a wound was still asking to be seen. Silence meant he was already deciding where to bury it. He climbed into the back seat, buckled himself in, and folded both hands in his lap. "Mom," he said after I started the engine, "do they think I'm stupid?" The question stripped every excuse I had ever made for my family right down to the bone. I pulled back into the driveway, shut off the engine, and turned to look at him. "No," I said. "Some adults confuse grades, money, and trophies with character. That's their mistake, not who you are." He nodded, but he did not look convinced. Aiden had struggled with reading speed since first grade, yet he could take apart a broken radio, pinpoint the failed component, and rebuild it without any instructions. His teachers called him inventive. My sister called him unfocused. My parents repeated whichever description came from the person they considered more successful. That person had always been Danielle. I had not used her name at the cookout because, in my mind, naming her would have made the scene feel ordinary. Just another argument between sisters. It was not ordinary. Danielle was 39, polished, persuasive, and skilled at dressing up humiliation as helpful advice. She ran Clearwater Learning, a private tutoring company that promised to uncover the future hidden inside every child. What almost no one outside the company knew was that Clearwater existed because of me. 5 years earlier, Danielle had brought me a business plan scrawled in colored marker across a dozen poster boards. I built the financial model, negotiated the first lease, invested the money left to me by our grandmother, and personally guaranteed the credit line. In exchange, my holding company owned 51% of Clearwater. The remaining shares belonged to Danielle and 2 small investors. We agreed that she would be the public founder while I handled risk, compliance, and expansion behind the scenes. She said she needed a success that felt entirely her own. In reality, it was the same bargain I had been making since childhood. Danielle received the applause and I received permission to remain in the room. The cookout was supposed to celebrate Clearwater's largest expansion yet. On Monday morning, the bank was scheduled to release a $2.1 million construction loan for 3 new locations. My signature was required at closing because my company owned the controlling interest, and because the loan depended on my personal guarantee. Danielle had spent months presenting the expansion as proof that she had built an empire from nothing. She had even placed reserved cupcakes beneath a gold sign that read, "For our future leaders." I had ordered the cupcakes and spent 6 weekends correcting Danielle's projections. Still, when he reached for one, she acted as though he was contaminating a prize he had not earned. My parents' silence hurt because it was so familiar. My father, Gerald, excused cruelty when it came from successful people. My mother, Patricia, called appeasement family peace. When Dad told Aiden he could eat at home, he was not making a decision about dessert. He was confirming the hierarchy. Danielle's image first, his grandchild's dignity second, my objections last. How many times can a person call surrender, keeping the peace, before peace becomes another word for permission? As I drove away, Danielle sent her first message. Bring the food back. Guests are asking questions. Her next message said, do not make business decisions while emotional. That was the message that changed the temperature inside me. She understood immediately that I had the power to stop Monday's closing. He simply believed I would never use it. At a red light, I opened the secure folder on my phone and read the draft email I had prepared 2 weeks earlier but had been too afraid to send. It concerned irregular transfers, missing scholarship records, and enrollment figures that did not match the company's tax filings. I had planned to confront Danielle privately after the expansion. I had told myself that waiting protected the employees. The truth was uglier. Waiting protected me from my parents' disappointment. Aiden watched the messages light up the dashboard. Are we in trouble? He asked. No, I said, and for the first time that day I believed my own answer. We're done accepting it. I drove home, reheated soup, and gave him the chocolate cupcake I had packed before leaving. Then, while he built a small motor from spare parts at the kitchen table, I opened my laptop and stopped protecting the people who had never once protected him. I did not send a single angry message. I opened Clearwater's operating agreement and followed it line by line. Section 8.4 allowed the majority owner to suspend a pending financing when credible evidence suggested that financial information supplied to a lender might be inaccurate. I attached the unmatched transfers, the conflicting enrollment reports, and the email in which Danielle had ordered our bookkeeper to classify personal promotional expenses as student outreach. At 8:44 p.m., I notified the bank that I could not certify the closing package. At 8:52 I requested an emergency independent audit. At 9:06, I informed the board that no funds should move until the audit committee reviewed the discrepancies. Then I called my attorney, Rosa Delgado, and asked her one question. Can I protect the company without protecting Danielle? Rosa had represented Clearwater since its very first lease. She knew every concession I had made, and every time Danielle had called basic oversight a personal attack. You can, she said. But once the bank receives this, she will know the era of informal forgiveness is over. It ended in my parents' backyard, I replied. The decision felt like opening sealed envelopes in reverse order. The newest document sat on top. A marketing invoice for $36,000. Beneath it was a transfer to a luxury event company owned by Danielle's friend. Beneath that was a scholarship ledger with 11 names but only 6 signed applications. Beneath that was an email from our operations director asking why Danielle had raised projected enrollment by 40% just 2 days before the loan package went to the bank. For months I had noticed small fractures. Danielle insisted they were timing differences, clerical errors, or the cost of thinking bigger. I corrected them quietly because the centers employed 47 people and served more than 600 families. Usefulness had become her shield. Every time I questioned her, she reminded me how many tutors depended on her vision. Every time I mentioned governance, my father said I was jealous because Danielle was the face of the company. Every time I considered enforcing the agreement, my mother asked whether paperwork was worth losing a sister. No one asked what I was losing by staying. At 9:31, Danielle called. I declined it. At 9:33, Dad called. I declined that too. At 9:38, my mother left a voicemail. Please call before your sister says something she cannot take back. Even then, the emergency in her mind was what Danielle might say, not what Danielle had already done. Aiden had gone to bed by 10 o'clock, but before he did, he placed his half-built motor beside my laptop. It doesn't work yet, he said. That doesn't mean it never will. I stared at him because the sentence was so simple and so far beyond anything my family had offered him that afternoon. After I tucked him in, I returned to the documents. At 10:19, Rosa forwarded a notice from the bank. The closing was postponed pending review. At 10:31, the board chair confirmed an emergency meeting for Sunday morning. At 10:44, Clearwater's chief operating officer wrote that Danielle had ordered staff to continue announcing the expansion as fully funded. That instruction turned my concern into something more serious. Continuing to market unfunded locations could expose the company to claims from families and landlords. I instructed the operations officer, not Danielle, to pause all expansion advertising. At 10:58, the first investor called. At exactly 11 o'clock, I counted the notifications. 71. Then Dad's name appeared again. This time I answered, placed the call on speaker, and said nothing. He did not ask about Aiden. He did not ask whether we had arrived home safely. He said, "Fix what you did before Monday, or you will regret making your sister look small." The sentence settled something inside me. "Dad," I said, "Danielle made herself look small. I only stopped making her look solvent." He inhaled sharply. In the background, I heard Danielle shouting that the bank had frozen the deal, Mom crying, and someone demanding to know who had contacted the board. Dad lowered his voice. "This company is her future." "No," I replied. "It's an asset she manages for other owners, employees, and families." She forgot the difference. He said blood mattered more than numbers. I looked toward Aiden's room and asked, "Whose blood?" Silence. It was the first question all evening that no one could twist into an accusation. Dad warned me that if the expansion failed, I would be blamed. "Then they should read the audit," I said. "Good night." I ended the call, turned off the ringer, and slept better than I had in years. By morning, Danielle had not apologized. Instead, she had launched a campaign to make me the villain. She told employees I was trying to seize her company, told relatives I had punished her over a child's dessert, and told the investors I was unstable. She believed the loudest version of a story became the truth. Sunday's emergency board meeting began at 9 o'clock in the morning. Danielle joined from my parents' dining room, framed by the same gold banner that had hung over the cupcakes. She had changed clothes, fixed her hair, and arranged her expression into the calm concern she used for donors. Dad sat at one side of her. Mom sat at the other. Neither was a shareholder, officer, or employee, but Danielle had invited them as family observers, hoping their presence would make me retreat into the role they preferred. Rosa attended with me. The two minority investors joined remotely, along with our operations director and an independent auditor named Trevor Nakamura. Danielle opened by calling the postponement a misunderstanding caused by my emotional reaction at a family event. She said the financial questions were routine and that I had weaponized my ownership to punish her. Then she looked directly into the camera and added, "Vanessa has always struggled when attention isn't centered on her." 5 years earlier, that sentence would have sent me into a frantic defense of my character. That morning, I asked Trevor to share his screen. The first spreadsheet showed that Clearwater had reported 847 active students to the bank, while its billing system showed 619. Danielle said the difference represented committed families. Trevor asked for signed contracts. She had none. The second document showed $86,000 withdrawn from a restricted scholarship account over 14 months. Danielle claimed the money funded community outreach. Trevor displayed invoices for a private launch dinner, custom furniture for her home office, personal styling, and a week at a resort where she had filmed promotional videos for less than 3 hours. Dad interrupted to say successful executives needed to maintain an image. Rosa reminded him that restricted scholarship money was not an image budget. Danielle's smile tightened, but she still looked more offended than afraid. She said every expense had benefited the brand and the brand benefited the children. Then Trevor opened a folder titled Future Initiative Source Material. I had never seen it before. Inside were photographs of Aiden's science notebooks, sketches of a low-cost moisture sensor he had built for our balcony plants, and a recording of him explaining how the device could help community gardens avoid wasting water. 6 months earlier, Danielle had visited our apartment while I was sick. Aiden had proudly shown her his project. She praised him, asked to photograph the pages, and said she wanted to show a teacher who might help him. I had considered that visit evidence that she could be kind when no audience was present. Trevor clicked to the next file. Clearwater's grant application for a $250,000 innovation award. The centerpiece was a student-developed environmental sensor program. The diagrams had been redrawn, but the measurements, unusual phrasing, and even one misspelled label matched Aiden's notebook. The application credited Danielle as the creator of the curriculum and described the original student contributor only as a participant in a pilot exercise. Clearwater had been selected as a finalist. Danielle planned to announce the award at Monday's loan closing. My body went cold, but my voice did not. Did Aiden or I authorize the use of his work? I asked. Danielle glanced at Dad before answering. It was a child's craft project. I developed it into something useful. There was the whole family system in one sentence. What belonged to us became hers when it had value. What hurt us became insignificant when acknowledging it would cost her. I asked whether she had called his project useless when she took it. Danielle said I was distorting her words. Trevor then played an audio memo attached to the grant folder. Danielle's voice filled the meeting. Keep the boy's name out of it. His school record weakens the future leader narrative. No one spoke. Even Dad looked away. Was the cupcake comment cruel because it was spontaneous? Or worse, because it revealed a judgment Danielle had already converted into policy? I did not ask the question aloud. The documents asked it for me. One investor demanded an immediate vote to suspend Danielle as chief executive pending the audit. The other seconded it. Under the operating agreement, my majority vote would decide the result. Danielle leaned toward the camera. You cannot do this to your own sister. I am not doing this because you are my sister, I said. I am doing it because you used restricted funds, inflated numbers, and took a child's work while arguing he had no future. Mom began crying. Dad told me to pause the vote and settle privately. I looked at them both. Privately is where this behavior survived. I voted yes. Danielle was suspended. Her access to company accounts was revoked, and all public announcements about the grant were cancelled. She did not lose everything in that moment, but she lost the one thing she had treated as permanent: control. As the meeting ended, she whispered, "You will destroy Clearwater just to prove you matter." I closed my laptop and answered, "No. I am finally separating Clearwater from the person destroying it." Danielle did not respond to suspension with reflection. She responded with a story. By noon, relatives were forwarding me a message she had posted in a private family group. My sister used her disabled child as an excuse to steal the company I built. Aiden was not disabled, and I had never described him that way. Danielle had chosen the word because she knew our relatives would either pity him or question his ability, and both reactions served her. I took a screenshot, sent it to Rosa, and refused to answer in the group. 10 minutes later, Danielle posted a photograph of herself outside Clearwater with a caption about surviving betrayal. Employees began receiving calls from parents asking whether the centers were closing. Tutors worried about their paychecks. She had been suspended to protect the company, yet she was willing to frighten every family attached to it if fear helped restore her authority. I authorized the operations director to send a factual notice. All current centers would remain open. Payroll was secure, and an independent review concerned only the expansion and executive conduct. No names, no accusations, no family details. That contrast mattered. Danielle needed an audience. I needed a record. By afternoon, the record grew worse. Trevor found that she had submitted Aiden's photographs to the grant committee after removing identifying metadata. He also found 3 emails in which she instructed a marketing contractor to describe the sensor project as evidence that Clearwater's methods could transform underperforming children into future innovators. Aiden had never been enrolled at Clearwater. Danielle had used his work to prove her program's success while using his academic struggles to erase him from the credit. When Rosa contacted the Grant Foundation, its counsel requested the source files and immediately suspended Clearwater's application. The foundation also notified the local education partnership that had featured Danielle as a keynote speaker. By evening, the keynote invitation was withdrawn. That was when her husband, Marcus, called me. He had stayed mostly silent at the cookout, busy near the grill while Danielle blocked Aiden's hand. I had resented him for not intervening, but his voice now sounded less defensive than stunned. He said Danielle had told him the expansion was fully funded and the grant award nearly guaranteed. She had also told him that the company had paid back every dollar I invested. None of that was true. He asked whether the resort trip had really come from scholarship money. I sent him the auditor's preliminary list and told him to speak with his own lawyer. I did not ask him to leave her, expose her, or take my side. Revenge becomes corruption when it demands control over innocent people's choices. I wanted consequences tied to facts, not destruction tied to rage. Still, facts had their own force. Marcus discovered that Danielle had used their joint home equity line to cover personal expenses after the board rejected reimbursement. She had hidden the statements by changing the mailing address to Clearwater's office. He moved into a hotel that night and froze their joint discretionary account. My parents called this a catastrophe I had caused. Dad left a voicemail saying, "A decent sister would have warned her before involving outsiders." I saved it. Then I opened the oldest document in the audit file, An email from 3 years earlier in which I had warned Danielle that restricted money required separate accounting. Her reply read, "Stop acting like my supervisor. You are lucky I let you be part of my vision." I forwarded both messages to Dad with one sentence. "She was warned." He did not answer. The next morning, Mom came to my apartment carrying a bakery box. I met her in the hallway so Aiden would not hear us. She held out 6 cupcakes as if symmetry could repair humiliation. "Your sister was wrong," she said, "but losing the loan, the grant, and maybe her marriage is too much." "Which consequence did I invent?" I asked. Mom blinked. "You started the audit." "No. I stopped preventing one." She asked me to reinstate Danielle just long enough for the loan to close, promising the family would handle the rest privately. I told her the bank would not rely on numbers we could not verify, and I would not guarantee debt for an executive who had lied to lenders. Mom's expression hardened. "So you are choosing business over family?" "Danielle chose herself over both." I pointed to the bakery box. "And you are still trying to replace accountability with dessert." She left the box on the floor and walked away. I threw it out unopened. That evening, Aiden asked why Grandma had visited. I told him the adults were dealing with a problem at work. He studied me for a moment and asked, "Is it because I touched the cupcake?" I knelt until we were eye to eye. "No. The cupcake showed me a problem that was already there. You did nothing wrong." He exhaled and the tension left his shoulders. That small release mattered more than every frantic call on my phone. Danielle had built her power by teaching people to carry guilt that belonged to her. I would not let her place even 1 ounce of it on him. The final board hearing took place 9 days after the cookout, in Clearwater's largest classroom. I chose the location because the company belonged to the students and employees affected by the decision, not to our family mythology. The board sat at a row of tables. Trevor presented the completed audit. Rosa attended as company counsel, and an outside employment attorney advised us on the suspension. Danielle arrived with her own lawyer, Marcus, and my parents. Marcus sat apart from her. My parents tried to sit beside the board until Rosa explained that they were witnesses, not decision-makers. For the first time in my life, someone enforced a boundary before I had to defend it. The audit confirmed that Danielle had diverted $122,000 in restricted and company funds, overstated projected enrollment, concealed related party vendors, and submitted Aiden's work without permission. It also found that she had instructed an employee to backdate 2 approval forms after the bank requested support. The employee had refused and preserved the messages. Danielle's lawyer argued that the spending reflected aggressive marketing, not theft, and that the numbers were optimistic estimates. Trevor replied that optimism did not create signatures, students, or authorization. Then the operations director described years of intimidation. Danielle rewarded employees who supported her public image and excluded those who raised compliance concerns. 3 written statements followed. One tutor said Danielle had ordered her to remove a scholarship applicant because the child's parents would not photograph well. Another employee said Danielle had reserved program places for donors while publicly claiming selection was need-based. The third described being told that compassion was bad branding. Danielle listened with her jaw set. When she finally spoke, she did not apologize. She said Clearwater would never have grown without her willingness to make hard choices. She called the audit a technical ambush and Aiden's project raw material that any competent educator could have improved. Marcus closed his eyes. Mom whispered her name as a warning. Dad stared at the floor. Danielle continued, looking at me. "Vanessa has always wanted what I have. She hides behind spreadsheets because she cannot inspire people." I waited until she finished. "You are right about one thing," I said. "You inspired people. Some were inspired to stay silent. Some were inspired to change records. Some were inspired to believe children only matter when they improve your image. That is why inspiration without accountability is dangerous." The board voted on 4 resolutions. Danielle was removed as chief executive and terminated for cause. Her remaining ownership distributions would be withheld as allowed by the operating agreement until the company recovered misused funds and legal costs. The expansion was reduced from 3 locations to 1, funded without my personal guarantee after 6 months of verified performance. Clearwater would notify affected donors, repay the scholarship account, and formally correct the grant submission to identify Aiden as the original creator. Finally, an independent executive would lead the company while employees elected a non-management representative to the board. Every resolution passed. Danielle lost her title, access, salary, public platform, and the right to present herself as the unquestioned founder. The Grant Foundation barred her from serving on its funded programs for 5 years. The Education Partnership canceled 2 additional appearances. Marcus's lawyer delivered a separation proposal after the hearing. Whether their marriage survived would be their decision, but secrecy would no longer make it easy. Danielle looked around the room as if waiting for Dad to reverse the vote through sheer force of disappointment. He could not. "Say something," she demanded. Dad's face had aged in 9 days. "Did you take the boy's work?" he asked. Danielle answered, "That is not the point." Dad stood. "It is the only point I understand." He left the room. Mom followed, then stopped beside me. "Are you happy now?" she asked. It was the question families use when they want the person who exposed the damage to feel ashamed of the wreckage. "No," I said. "I am responsible now." Danielle heard me. For the first time, she had no room, title, parent, or frightened employee willing to translate her consequences into my cruelty. She gathered her papers and walked out alone. The consequences did not end when Danielle left the hearing. Real accountability rarely arrives as one dramatic collapse. It arrives in smaller doors that no longer open. Clearwater removed her biography from its website. She sold her new car to begin reimbursing the company and placed her house on the market after Marcus refused to use joint savings to cover debts she had hidden. My parents asked to visit Aiden 2 weeks later. I met them first at a quiet cafe and gave them 3 conditions. They would not minimize the cookout. They would not ask him to comfort them. And they would not mention Danielle's losses as though he had caused them. Dad bristled at being given rules. I reminded him that the last time he made the rules, a child was denied food in a yard full of adults. He lowered his eyes and agreed. During the visit, Mom told Aiden, "I should have spoken up when your aunt was unkind." Dad took longer. He sat across from Aiden at our kitchen table, beside the repaired motor that now spun a tiny paper wheel. "What I said at the cookout was wrong," he finally said. "You didn't have to earn that cupcake, and you didn't have to earn my protection." Aiden considered him with the seriousness children use when adults finally tell the truth. "Why didn't you say that then?" Dad opened his mouth, closed it, and answered, "Because I was afraid of upsetting the wrong person." Aiden looked toward me. I did not rescue Dad from the discomfort. "Was I the right person to upset?" he asked. Dad's face folded. "No. That was the first useful apology my father had ever given, because it did not ask to be admired. It simply named the failure. We did not become a healed family that afternoon. Healing is not a photograph taken after everyone says sorry. It is a pattern measured over time. My parents began therapy, stopped carrying Danielle's messages, and accepted that access to Aiden depended on consistent respect. Danielle herself sent no apology for nearly a month. Her first email described her losses before saying she was sorry if Aiden had misunderstood an adult joke. I replied with 2 sentences. "He understood you correctly. Contact me again only when you are prepared to name what you did without making him responsible for interpreting it." 3 weeks later, a second email arrived. It was shorter. She admitted she had taken his project because she believed crediting him would weaken the Grant story. She admitted the cupcake comment was meant to remind me that she controlled the family gathering. She admitted she had expected our parents to support her and me to retreat. Then she wrote, "I thought your silence meant I was stronger." I read that line twice. My silence had never been agreement, but I had used it so often that everyone, including me, had mistaken endurance for virtue. I did not forgive Danielle. I told her that any future contact would depend on repayment, cooperation with the company's corrective filings, individual therapy, and a direct apology to Aiden approved by his counselor. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would not restore her access to the places where she had caused harm. A boundary is not revenge postponed. It is the architecture that keeps revenge from becoming necessary again. Clearwater survived, repaid the scholarship account, and published transparent selection criteria. We withdrew the 3-location expansion and opened one smaller center the following spring. The first room was a workshop where students could build, repair, and test ideas without being ranked by how impressive they looked on paper. The grant foundation allowed Clearwater to submit a corrected application the next year. Aiden received full credit for the original sensor concept, but I refused a special award for him from the company, because I did not want another adult institution using him to repair its image. Instead, the foundation invited him to demonstrate the project alongside other young inventors. He stood behind a folding table, explained the sensor in a voice that shook only once, and answered every question. At the end, a student asked whether he had always known the invention would work. Aiden smiled and said, "No. I just knew that not working yet wasn't the same as having no future." I had to look away for a moment. Not because he had proven Danielle wrong. His worth had never depended on defeating her prediction. I looked away because he no longer carried her prediction as a question. On the anniversary of the cookout, Aiden and I hosted a small gathering in the courtyard of our building. We invited friends, tutors, neighbors, and several Clearwater families. The food sat on one long table where everyone served themselves. At the center was a tray of chocolate cupcakes. There were no labels, no reserved rows, and no adults deciding whose future qualified them for sweetness. Aiden took the first one, then handed the next to a shy child standing behind him. My phone stayed quiet in my pocket. The 71 calls that once felt like an approaching storm had become evidence of how many people panicked when one woman finally stopped absorbing the consequences meant for them. Danielle had lost the company she treated as a throne, the reputation she built from borrowed work, the financial security she risked for appearances, and the automatic loyalty of the family members who had protected her. I had lost something too. The fantasy that keeping everyone close was the same as keeping my child safe. It was a painful trade but an honest one. So tell me, when a family asks you to preserve peace by sacrificing someone quieter, is that peace worth keeping? And when the person causing the harm finally faces the cost, is that revenge? Or is it simply the bill arriving at the correct address? I watched Aiden laugh with chocolate frosting at the corner of his mouth and knew my answer. A promising future is not a prize handed out by the loudest person at the table. It begins the moment someone refuses to let cruelty decide who deserves a place there. Thank you for joining us through this story. All characters, conversations, and outcomes are fictional and created only for entertainment and reflection. We hope it reminds you that someone can be part of your past without deserving a place in your future. Growth sometimes means honoring what you learned without returning to what hurt you.